Bench of the Supreme Court will deliver its verdict today on the validity of the central law for 10% of reservation benefits to economically weaker sections. Now, this, of course, is an extremely important law that has reached the Supreme Court. Now, we're expecting the court to pronounce its verdict on the 10% reservation in all colleges and government jobs as well for poor sections of society, that is the so-called upper classes, which are economically weaker. I think we've got Harsha joining us live on this. Harsha, take us through what we're expecting today. Of course, this is going to be a very keenly watched Supreme Court judgment.
Exactly. This is a very important day as the verdict on the validity of the 103rd Constitution Amendment for the reservation, 10% reservation for the economically weaker section is going to come. Right now we are reporting from Supreme Court lawns. We'll try to show you the Supreme Court lawns as we're expecting the bench to assemble at around 10:30 to 11 a.m. and the verdict will soon come. Initially, this entire discussion was heard in the Supreme Court in the 3-bench panel of judges, but later it got shifted to the bench of 5 judges. And today the verdict will come, in which we are getting to know that the verdict was already reserved on September 27th. After the thorough discussion, the line of discussion which happened till 7 days, and today the verdict will come, and we are getting to know that Justice U Lalit and Justice Dinesh will the order of both the judges will be comprising together, and there will be 3 different judges. So we are expecting that there will be 4 orders which will be coming today in every eyes on this reservation to economically weaker section. Though we all know that the 103rd Amendment was cleared in January 2019, but it was instantly challenged after the Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan election in Supreme Court. Now the basic structure of the constitution is being questioned in this entire. All the judges have framed 3 fundamental questions, and on the basis of those 3 fundamental questions, the entire verdict will depend because the first of the question is whether the amendment of the constitution will violate the already existing basic structure of the rule of the law of the reservation, and the second, can the private colleges be forced to follow this 10% reservation category which depends on the economic factor, and the third one is whether the amendment can be done depending on the economic discussing the economic factor as a part of the reservation, because till now the socially and educationally backward are seen as the point for reservation. So economic can be a factor, the income can be a factor for reservation. So there will be 3 questions, fundamental questions, on which today's decision will depend on a very important discussion, because there were 30 petitions which were filed in Supreme Court against this entire amendment. Though Congress and very opposition parties themselves said that they will follow rule of law, and also they also stated that the reservation cap which was implemented nationally by Supreme Court in 1992, this amendment violates that national cap of reservation. It also violates the Indra Swani judgment which came on the reservation, that income cannot be a part for the factor for the reservation, and it will also violate the quota, the factors, the reservation, the rights of SC, BCs, that means socially economically backward section, OBCs, SC and ST. And if we talk about the center already stated that they have approved the creation of 2.1 lakh seats in educational institution and the government jobs, the center affiliated education institution for the economically weaker section, and this will help them lift the poverty of the poor section, and it will also strengthen the other section of the society. So this is very important. And as Supreme Court judges also stated that why income section, why not the scholarship should be given on the other ways, the poorly people should be lifted, why only the reservation category. Then center also discussed it and stated their statement stating that they are already giving a scholarship, already other modes are being applied. 25% admissions in central affiliated educational institution are through scholarships only, but that is not sufficient. If the 10% reservation, amongst that 50% will be given, then the poverty of the poor will be lifted. So this is the entire discussion which happened in September continuously for 7 days. Now we are waiting for all the judges to assemble at around 10:30 in the court.
Okay.
And shortly, the very important decision on EWS category will come. So very important for the people who are economically very weak in the society, they are the poor section of the society. Every eye, because in the general category also there are many who are economically very poor. poor. So this decision will directly impact the people, the general class who are poorly in terms of income, and whether income can be a factor to give the reservation, 10% reservation, violating the existing basic structure. So this will be the discussion which will be done, and the verdict will revolve around that only. Nupur, back to you.
Absolutely. As you're pointing out, of course, there are going to be three central questions that the Supreme Court will be hoping to answer today. One of them, of course, is going to be whether the basic structure of the Constitution is going to be altered by allowing for economic status as a factor for reservation. The other part of it, of course, is whether private institutions could be forced to follow it, and could the quota exclude communities historically sidelined based on caste and religion. So those are the three questions that the Supreme Court will be looking to answer today. But even as we await this judgment, do remember that this is a 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court that will be essentially coming out with the verdict. It had heard the case for 7 straight days, and thereafter it had reserved the verdict. And today, of course, we are expecting the verdict to come out. So everybody's eyes on the Supreme Court. It will also answer the basic question whether 50% reservation, whether that quota can be extended by this or not. Now, the states, of course, have been very divided on this, depending on who's in power in which particular state. Joining me right now on the phone line is Mr. Sankla. He's an advocate in the Supreme Court. Mr. Sankla, good morning. Thank you very much for speaking to us on Republic TV. To begin with, Mr. Sankla, what are your expectations from today's verdict? Of course, the verdict will essentially answer the 3 basic questions as we've been talking about. But give us a sense of what we should be expecting today.
Well, the decision today, should the decision come on the 3 material points that you've raised, is very important, and it's going to actually change how the executive, the legislation, and the judiciary function. We all know that in the Sony judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court, the 50% ceiling had been created to say that you cannot go beyond that 50% ceiling. In most of the states, that ceiling has already been exhausted. There were certain challenges to it in the Honorable Supreme Court which failed. One was in Karnataka, the other was in Mumbai. Now, the other aspect to that is that if you actually disconnect that, then the amendment, so to say, would that change the basic structure of the Constitution? This was laid down in Keshwan and Bharti and gave a landmark judgment. And in Keshwan and Bharti, what was said was that the Constitution itself has 2 parts. One is the basic nature or the fundamental nature of the Constitution that cannot be changed, altered, modified, amended by any means whatsoever. And the other, of course, was that it is changed with changing times, etc. So, since the 103rd Amendment, which we are talking about right now, seeks to change the fundamental part of the Constitution, because the fundamental part of the Constitution, the basic nature of the Constitution, was protection of the minority, of the backward classes, and people who had been segregated and alienated because of their caste. So we're going to see a huge shift in that should this actually go through. It's a very exciting time that we are in, because it's very important to know what the Honorable Supreme Court is going to come, because it's actually going to have consequences on how we interpret Keshwan and Bharti and the Ambika Soni judgment.
Absolutely, Mr. Sankla, appreciate your speaking to us, and thank you very much for actually breaking down what we are expecting today. As Mr. Sankla, of course, said, it's going to be extremely important to watch out for this judgment when it does come out. 10:30 is the time when we are being told that the 5 judges bench is going to assemble. That's about 15 minutes from now. And as I was earlier saying, of course, the judges did hear this case for about 7 days in a row and then reserved their judgment. So we should be expecting this judgment out shortly. Do remember that this is going to be the last big judgment of the current Chief Justice, Justice UU Lalit, before he retires tomorrow. So in that sense, also extremely important. Swapnil Kothari also joining us on the phone line. Mr. Kothari, good morning. Mr. Kothari, the one big question that this judgment is likely to answer is the fact, does the 103rd Amendment essentially alter the country's constitution? That's going to be extremely important. But what are your thoughts as we go into this big judgment today?
Good morning, Nupur. The 103rd Amendment is constitutionally valid. I think that is what is most likely to be the judgment by the Supreme Court, simply because it does not violate the Mandal Commission, which talked about the 50% reservation, and that spoke about certain backward classes where any reservations needed to be there. This essentially talks about economically weaker sections. Now, economically weaker sections could be people from the backwards classes also, and they could be from the forward classes also. An argument could be made against the 103rd Amendment that basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to push forward the poorer forward sections of the society. In the sense, people who are not Dalits or Adivasis, but they are very poor people, but so they need that 10% reservation. So that is an argument that could be made, and that violates the equality clause of the Constitution. Now, the courts are more likely to look at it in the way that, no, it is just the economically weaker sections, and for that purpose, you need to add the Article 15.5 and Article 15.6 and then Article 16.6 also, whereby the 10% reservation is to be made. So that is going to be a litmus test, basically, for the court to decide. And basically, when you decide that a constitutional amendment has to be validated, you decide whether or not the basic structure of the Constitution is being violated. The basic structure means your fundamental rights, the parliamentary form of government, the bicameral legislature, the directive principles of state policy. All of those things need to be there in place, and they do not need to go for a toss, to put it in simple terms. Those are 4 or 5 things, is essentially the judicial review, that is the power of judicial review. These 5, 6 things form essentially the crux of the constitutional scheme. And this, in a sense, is not going to be violated by the 103rd Amendment, because the 103rd Amendment merely envisages to promote the weaker sections, that is the really poor people who cannot afford the same dawn that you and I can afford when we get up in the morning.
Right.
So that is a provision of an opportunity to these people. That is what the court is going to look at. And that is the reason why most likely, as I said, the 103rd Amendment has a noble objective,
Right.
and is most likely going to be upheld as constitutionally valid. So in no way that the Indira Saune judgment, which is the Mandal Commission judgment, is being infracted or is being, there was a 9-judge bench. So the court is going to say that we have 5 judges. We do not see that there is in any way an overlap between these two, because otherwise an 11-judge bench would have to sit.
Absolutely.
If it were to overrule the Mandal Commission judgment. But here there is no question of overruling, because there is no similarity of issues. Here it is, in fact, an extension of affirmative action, if I may use that word, which we use in the American Constitution. So that is the reason why this is going to be at least running into 400 to 500 pages, and it is going to be a great read for all the people who love the Constitution of India and who really want to see India progressing. And I hope that the courts do not hold this as unconstitutional, and if they do, then it will be a lesson for me as well after 28 years of practice, that where is it that possibly I have missed, and I may even disagree with the judgment.
All right. All right, Mr. Kothari, of course, we will be talking once again after that judgment does come out. Thank you for the moment, Mr. Kothari, for joining us and explaining to us how you see this going forward. But as Mr. Kothari was saying, of course, there are going to be basically 3 questions that are answered by the court today. One is whether reservations can be solely granted on the basis of economic criteria. The other is whether EWS reservation is valid, even though it excludes the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, other backward classes, and essentially something that is guaranteed in the Constitution. And the third is whether states can, of course, provide reservation in private educational institutions which do not receive government aid. So all those 3 questions likely to be answered today. As I was earlier pointing out, do remember that this is going to be the last judgment of the Chief Justice of India, UU Lalit, who retires tomorrow. It is a 5-judge constitution bench that is hearing the matter today. They have been here in the last hearing that sat for 7 straight days when they were hearing this case and had reserved their judgment. So about 10:30 or so is when we are expecting the 3-judge bench to assemble and give out, the 5-judge bench, I beg your pardon, to assemble and give out the verdict. Now,